California's Gold is produced in association with KCET Los Angeles and is seen statewide on California Public Television. This series is endorsed by the California Teachers Association, the California School Boards Association, and the California Library Association.
California's Gold is brought to you by Ford, with a world of new ideas that make being out on the road more fun and more economical. Like Sync, the hands-free communication and entertainment system from Microsoft. It lets you order up practically anything you want to hear just by asking. And turn-by-turn navigation gets you exactly where you want to go. Ford hopes you enjoy traveling through California with Huell, perhaps in one of our remarkable new products.
I love old airplanes, especially old airplanes that were cutting edge, state-of-the-art when they first appeared on the scene and were being tested. Recently, I spent the day at Edwards Air Force Base in Southern California's Mojave Desert and saw a lot of neat old planes, many of them at the Air Force Flight Test Center Museum on the base, and many of them on display at several other locations throughout the base. Now, these were all planes that were tested and flown at Edwards and are part of Edwards and our nation's proud aviation history. But on this trip, we were in search of a very obscure but very important part of our nation's space history. And it took place right here on Edwards at NASA's Dryden Flight Research Center, way back in the 1960s. Now, we all know that man first set foot on the moon July 20th, 1969. The whole world was watching, and it was a big deal, because NASA not only had to figure out how to get to the moon, but they also had to figure out how to land on the surface of the moon, get out, walk around, and then leave the surface of the moon, go back to the circling capsule, and then come back to Earth. That was a huge accomplishment, and a big part of that was tested and proven at Edwards. Now, to get to the historic spot where all this testing took place, we traveled to a very remote and older part of the base. And it was here we rediscovered this wonderful chapter from California's Moon Gold. Well, history is where you find it. We are here at South Base. South Base is the original part of Edwards Air Force Base. It dates back over 50 years. And looking at where we're standing right now, at first glance, this doesn't look very important. Actually, it doesn't look like it's even worth a visit. But this place, tell me if I'm over-exaggerating when I say this, this place right here, this concrete ramp right here, is probably one of the most historic places in the entire American history of the American space system. Would you agree with that?
That's not an exaggeration at all.
Okay, he knows what he's talking about. Introduce yourself to everybody.
Huell, I'm Dr. Christian Gelzer. I'm the historian for NASA Dryden Flight Research Center here at Edwards.
Okay, now this is a little visited area over here, isn't it?
Yeah, very few people come
over here.
No.
But we're here because I love hidden history, kind of obscure history, but important history here in California. And let's set this thing up. President Kennedy, back in the early 1960s, said that by the end of the decade, Americans were going to land on the moon, right?
Yes. And more importantly, they were going to come back. It wasn't a one-way trip.
Right. So that was a big deal, that Americans were going to go to the moon, and that presented a lot of problems. Let's talk about the biggest problem that it presented itself to.
The biggest problem for a lot of the engineers was not simply getting to the moon, it was actually landing on the moon itself. And in this case, it involved trying to land safely on the moon because of two issues. The moon has 1/6 our gravity, and the moon has no atmosphere at all. Out here, in fact, anywhere else you walk around, there's wind.
There's wind.
It's blowing you wherever you go, and you react naturally. You just walk into it, you lean into it. How are you going to build a machine in 1962? How are you going to design a machine that will counter whatever wind is blowing? Because you have to make that machine act as though it's flying in an environment that has no wind.
See, I think most of us think of when we went to the moon, the biggest deal was getting to the moon. That was a big deal, just getting to the moon and circling the moon, but then leaving that command module and going down to the moon so they could get out, walk around, and then come back to the command module and then come back to the United States. That was all a very big deal.
It was an extraordinary big deal, and I'm not undermining that at all. I don't mean to diminish that. It was a very big deal. But figuring out how to train the astronauts to land on the moon itself safely, that was an equally big deal, because at that point there were no flying simulators. There were no adequately capable computer simulators. So they had to figure out how to train the astronauts to do this in technology that we don't have, that we have today. Exactly.
So why did they come to Edwards?
This was the place to do it. This was the cutting edge, the place where you did the most sophisticated training and research flying on the planet. This was the place to do it.
You've set it up very well. Now we're getting ready to leave just this blank, because this looks pretty...
It's a barren place at many times, face it.
All right, but here's the rest of the story right over here. Gentlemen, introduce yourself to everybody.
I'm Gene Matrenga. I started out as the chief engineer on this project and wound up as the project manager.
And your name, sir?
Don Malikiu. I was the test pilot, one of the test pilots on the LLRV.
And when you talk about this project, you're talking about the project of figuring out how to get from the command module circling the moon down to the moon and back.
That is correct.
Now, how did you get involved in this thing? Did you know anything about this?
Well, back up just a little bit. In the X-15 days, we were asking ourselves the question, how do we land an airplane like the X-15? And we used an F-104. Joe Walker, our chief test pilot, and a young pilot named Neil Armstrong helped us develop this landing technique. So when it came time to land on the moon, we said, how do we do that again? And we came up with this idea of having a jet engine to simulate the lunar gravity, and then have a control system that was variable enough to optimize the conditions to get us down on the moon safely.
This was all brand new, cutting edge kind of stuff, wasn't it?
It was, and I got the advantage of flying and developing it.
And it was called the LLRV, which meant
Lunar Lander Research Vehicle.
Boy, that sounds good. And for all the test pilots who had been testing all these other state-of-the-art and cutting-edge aircraft, this took it even another step, because you're not talking about flying something here in Earth's gravity, you're talking about the moon.
It was a new regime to fly in. It was different.
And how exciting was it for you to think that you were even going to be involved in a project like this?
Well, it was very exciting, and I was working with Joe Walker, the chief pilot at the time, flying the project, and that made it even more interesting.
All right, now we have some wonderful old footage of this LLRV, and you tested it right here, right on this spot.
That's correct.
It was a strange looking vehicle, wasn't it?
It was a strange looking vehicle. We wanted it to be as unaerodynamic as we could make it. And it also was one of the first airplanes to fly by wire. Had no mechanical connections from the stick to the control devices.
So, wait a minute, you call it an airplane?
Well, it was a flight vehicle. I don't know that we'd call it an airplane.
Vehicle. It was a vehicle.
And what was it like to fly this thing?
Well, it was interesting. You sat out in the front almost by yourself, you thought. You were out there almost in the open air. And when you took off and lifted into the air, there was a lot of vibration and a lot of airflow and rocket engines firing. It was like taking a steam engine off the ground into flight. But once you get up into the air, 20, 30 feet, it quieted down, it was much smoother, and you felt a lot better about the whole situation.
Now, how high up would you go in this vehicle?
We would stay below 1,000 feet, but most of our development work was from 500 feet down in a lunar simulation mode.
So you would take it way up, 500 feet at least, and then what, practice coming back down?
We would take off, and from right here, this spot, we'd lift off, and we'd make a turn, and we'd fly to the west, climb to altitude, and we'd turn back. Our landing spot was about the same place as our takeoff location. Then we would get the machine all configured into the lunar simulation, and that's when the world was different, because it took great angles to make turns, and it took big delay times and anticipation, and you were actually flying in a lunar environment.
How many flights do you figure you took in this vehicle?
I flew 79 flights and I flew it over 19 months.
Wow. So
We flew over 200 flights total.
that's a lot of flights, and 19 months sounds like a long time, but you were on the fast track because of President Kennedy's deadline of putting a man on the moon.
The Houston people wanted the vehicles as soon as they could so the astronauts could start training.
So you were really working.
We were pushing, yeah.
Was it anything like anything you had ever done before?
No. Someone asked me one time, they said, "What is it? What's it like?" I said, "I'd never flown anything like that before, and I haven't flown anything like it since."
That's correct.
Yeah. You were in uncharted territory.
That's right.
Did you know at the time that this was a big deal, that you were part of history? Did you all have that feeling?
I had a little bit of that feeling, but it's interesting. At that stage, our goal and our purpose was to prove it, to make it work, evaluate it, and get it ready for them. Then down the road, after they made their trips to the moon and everything, and come back, and the astronauts saying, "We are so glad we had that." That's when it really hit home to me, and I thought, well, that made it all worthwhile even more.
There's history everywhere out here. I thought this was just a crack that had been broken in the old runway, but you think it relates directly to your testing days.
Well, as we flew the jet engine and the rocket over these loose joints here, they would just explode and fly off as debris in all
Blow
directions.
out the runway.
Yes, it would.
You're destroying government property here.
I deny it. I don't want to get a bill for that.
But it's interesting because nothing like that had been, the test had always been done in the air, not on the ground.
Yeah, V2Ls are like that because everything is coming down hot and high velocity underneath them, and anything that's a little bit loose, it would pick it up.
Wow.
And of course, we try to stay away from that. We didn't want it to recirculate and come back down through the engine.
There was debris flying everywhere.
Yes, there was.
This must have been an exciting time
Absolutely.
to be in this
Absolutely.
profession.
Yes.
All right, now our first stop has been here at the test area. Would you just call this was a test area?
This was a test area, that's
South
correct.
Base. Let's
South
take a
Base.
look out here, Cameron. We're looking at the vacant runway where the testing took place, but there's more on this Edwards adventure than just this empty test area. And that's where we're going right now for the payoff. Okay, as the adventure continues, it's one thing to visit the actual testing area here on Edwards Air Force Base. It's another to see the vehicle itself. And we have traveled a couple of miles, and look at this. Gentlemen, well, I'll tell you what, I'm almost breaking out in goosebumps. I can imagine what you all feel. This is the real thing right here.
Really is.
Now, how many of these were built?
We built 2 LLRVs for testing here at Edwards, and then they went down to Houston. And there were 3 LLTVs that the people at Houston had built for astronaut training.
For the advanced training by the astronauts.
That is correct.
This is what you flew in.
That's it.
Well,
One of
talk
them.
to me about it. I don't even know. Where would you sit?
Well, I was right up here in the front. And
Oh, there's your seat right there.
yeah, you take a peek in there. There's the seat. And initially, We had a control stick in the center of the seat, but then later in the program,
here.
right there, like a regular airplane.
Uh-huh.
But later in the program, we put in a 3-axis controller in order to make it more like the ship that was going to land on the moon, on the LEM, that the astronauts were going to fly.
So this was your stick right here.
This was the stick that gave you the yaw, roll, and pitch.
How does
all
it
in
feel
one.
to have that back in your hand again?
Well,
after
it was
all these
interesting
years?
to start to fly the 3-axis controller. I flew it on a ground simulator, and so I had an idea of what it was doing. But even so, like anything else, the first time it's a little bit new to you, but you do it a little bit and it becomes old hat.
What a strange thing to be sitting. This is the strangest. I've seen the pictures, I've seen the film, but to see it up close, it's a strange looking bird, isn't it?
It's unusual, yeah. It's unusual and strange. Not ugly,
It's like
unusual.
nothing else.
Well, let's take a tour around the place. First off, who came up with the ideas of these legs that it has on it?
The machine was designed by Bell Aerosystems in Niagara Falls, New York.
Uh-huh.
And
So it was going to be kind of to land on the moon, a soft landing?
well, to land on the moon with the soft landing, but we wanted as little aerodynamic effect as we could get. So that's why the open structure.
I got you. And there's the jet. That's what you were tearing up all the runways with.
That's correct. And it basically stayed vertical regardless of how the vehicle tilted around it.
What are these big balls over here?
The silver balls here are hydrogen peroxide rocket fuel tanks on both sides of the vehicle. There's a fore and an aft tank which had jet fuel, and then the 2 balls in the back are helium pressurization gas.
So there was hydrogen, there was helium.
There was helium, there was peroxide, and there was jet fuel.
Wow, that's an interesting mixture.
Yeah, no
And then
hydrogen.
all the electronics were on the back end of the vehicle.
This is where all the computers were, up
That's
here
correct.
on the back.
That's correct.
Wow, what did you think the first time they rolled this thing out?
I thought, what are they trying to get me into?
What were you trying to get them into?
I was trying to get him into something that we could do our research with.
Wow.
And it worked out well. We did a lot of good research with it.
But you know what? It doesn't look like it would be easy to maneuver. There's a lot going on here.
Well, when you lift it off, it has little bits of motion and everything, but they're quite controllable and flyable. And the platform on the back kept my diet because it weighed about 180 pounds, and I had to weigh about 180 pounds on this end to keep it balanced. Yeah.
Wow. There's an interesting story about the good old LLRV and President Lyndon Johnson, who carried on President Kennedy's dream of putting an American on the moon by the end of the 60s. Early on, Johnson visited Edwards Air Force Base, didn't he? When did he come here?
It was the summer of 1964.
Can you remember this presidential visit?
Oh, yes.
Was it a big deal?
Big deal when VIP like that show up. Why, you polish everything up and put on your best show.
So you had it all polished up, ready for the president to see, because this was cutting edge. It hadn't even been flown yet.
That's correct.
And what's the story? Because this is the interesting part of this story that I just heard from you all.
The story is that Lyndon Johnson wanted to sit in the vehicle.
He wanted to sit right there in your seat.
My seat.
That's right. And the Secret Service says, no, that's an ejection seat that could toss you up 1,000 feet in the air, and they didn't think that was a very good idea.
So they literally kept the president from sitting there.
Right. He just came and looked in the cockpit to see what it looked like.
Because they were afraid, the Secret Service was afraid he had hit the wrong button and he'd be ejected out of this thing.
Similar things had happened in the past in different areas, so you had to be careful who you put in the cockpit.
So he just walked around and looked at it from ground level.
Had to be
He actually got
satisfied.
up on a stand and looked in it,
Really?
but he couldn't sit in the seat.
Did you explain to him what it was all about?
Yes, we explained to him.
Do you think he understood all
Yes,
of that?
I think
'Cause
he
it's kind
understood.
of technical.
Yeah, but he was following the technical issues for NASA when he was the vice president and then as the president. So he was very familiar with it.
You know, this just reminds me, I've seen some great pictures of you as a young test pilot standing by this vehicle. That was a sharp-looking picture there.
That was 45 years ago.
Yeah, but you had a look of pride, of association with what you were doing.
I was part of it.
Now, they made 2 of these, and these are the ones that you tested here at Edwards.
Right.
Where's the other one?
The other one was crashed. Neil Armstrong had to eject out of it down in Houston.
So he ejected
Yes.
and it crashed.
That's correct.
So this is the only one of these left.
One research vehicle left.
Wow. And where do they keep this thing?
They keep it here at the Dryden Center.
They don't bring it out very often, do
No,
they?
just for you, Huell.
Oh, how long's it been since you've seen this thing?
I was out about 5 years ago with some family for a visit, and I toured around it inside the building where they had it in the building.
And how do you explain to family and friends what it was like to be here in the 60s doing this research on the Lunar Lander?
You know, I think it was complex enough. It was very difficult for them to understand, other than the fact that I flew it. And they were happy with that I was able to do that. But with the computer systems and all the things that had to go on to make this true simulation, it was pretty hard to explain.
Wow. Well, in all of your engineering feats over the years, does this rank near the top?
It ranks very close to the top.
Do you still kind of get excited when
Yes, because I realize what an important role we played in successfully putting people on the moon.
Yeah. Well, this is really exciting. And for your career, you didn't retire until decades later, but this had to be near the pinnacle.
This was at the high point. It was probably the most contribution that I made in my career to aviation development in the moon program.
This happened here in the 60s. We landed on the moon in
July 69.
July 69. Where were you when we landed on the moon using the technology that you had tested?
I was on vacation up in Bishop, California with some friends, 11 o'clock at night, watching an old black and white TV, straining our eyes to watch them land on the moon.
So you didn't have a VIP ticket
No,
at the front row at the Space Center.
just a vacation break was nice
You
enough.
watched it in Bishop
Yep,
at a
Bishop.
friend's house
Yeah.
on a black and white television
I
set.
did that, yeah.
Well, did it give you a sense of how did you all feel when you saw it happen successfully?
We're thrilled. And I was in Mammoth when it landed. And we drove home from Mammoth in order to watch it when they got out on the surface.
But see, isn't this the way it is many times? Not taking anything away from the astronauts and from the people who did the testing later on down the line. But lots of times the names of the people who were the pioneers, who started it out in the early testing, get lost in the shuffle.
Well, yes and no. I think we're recognized within the society and within the group as being part of it and contributing, and I know we have a strong feeling of being part of it. And up at Bishop, I had both fingers crossed and everything else praying for those boys to make a successful landing, because there had to be a lot of things go just right, and they did.
Well, they made it. No small thanks to you and to the
Thank you,
other
Huell.
people here who spent so much time and energy and really were pushing the envelope with this vehicle right here to make it all happen.
Yes, sir.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you
We're
so much.
ending right here by this vehicle, but time marches on. Look over here. Here's the plane that carries the shuttle back to Florida after it lands here at Edwards.
That's correct.
So you got the whole spectrum right here on this space.
That is correct.
I don't know whether to end this way. No, let's end over here. Y'all stand right over there, right where you are. Let's get a picture of these two guys right in front of the LLRV, Lunar Landing Research Vehicle. They're back, it's back, and all of this whole story is very much a part of California's gold. Remember that early research for the moon landing in 1969 took place right here in California. Thumbs up, fellas. Congratulations. Job well done. What a wonderful day we had in California's Mojave Desert, rediscovering California's lunar gold. And if you would like to go on this moon adventure again, share it with family or friends, or more importantly, donate a copy to your local school or library. Well, of course, it's available on DVD. All you have to do is call 1-800-266-5727, and we'll be glad to send it to you right away.
Ford and the Ford dealers are proud to have brought you California's Gold. Discover the new ideas we're developing to make being out on the road more enjoyable and more economical. Like EcoBoost, the turbocharged engine technology that gives you the power of a larger engine with surprising gas mileage. Ford is committed to making your traveling fun, economical, and environmentally responsible.